Hello everyone, and welcome to Wayfair Coding Academy's How to Linux series, where the goal of this series is to cover all things Linux, from the basics like standard installations and learning how to use your system, to more advanced topics such as advanced installations, customizing your system, and learning how to use various programs available on Linux. As one of the first 3 videos of this series, the goal is to demonstrate one of 3 different setups for installing a Linux operating system. This is because while distros may differ between each other with their specific install processes, the processes themselves are usually the same across the different setups. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to install a Linux distro on a dual boot setup. This will include both the configuration of the hardware as well as the actual install process, because there is one step in the install that needs to be covered for dual booting to work. As its name implies, dual booting allows us to have 2 different operating systems installed on the same machine. And just a quick fun fact, you can actually have more than 2 operating systems installed as well. This is referred to as multi-booting and is an extension of dual booting. Compared to virtual machines, dual booting is the next best method to installing Linux without wiping your current operating system or buying new hardware. This is because, unlike with virtual machines, you will have full use of the RAM, processing, and graphics card. The only downside is that you will still have limited amount of storage space, since you are now splitting the hard drives between 2 operating systems. The distro I'll be using for this video is Fedora, specifically the Fedora Workstation 40 Everything ISO. This is because the goal of this video is to focus on how to perform a dual boot setup. So I'm choosing a distro that should be relatively easy to install, but will still include the most common steps of an installation process that will be important in this video. Plus, Fedora is my preferred distro and is what I use for any video that doesn't require a specific distro. To acquire any Linux distro, you simply need to go to the website that hosts its downloads. For Fedora, that will be fedoraproject.org. When you get to the website, we go up here to the tabs and we go to Get Fedora. Under Get Fedora, there is a button Workstation. We click on that. This will take us to the main download page for Fedora. Usually the page for the Linux distro download will show the main primary file up front, but it will also have links to other options for alternative files as well as alternative methods for download. For the sake of this video, we're going to download the Fedora Workstation 40 Live ISO for Intel and AMD. To start to download, just click on this button here. And real quick, while that's downloading for you, I'll go ahead and talk about the rest of the download page for Fedora. So right here you see that the file we're downloading is a live ISO. What that means is that when we boot up into this ISO, we're not just going to get the installation process. We're actually going to start with a desktop preview so we can check out what software it comes preloaded with. We can check out some of the other features and things like that. We'll actually get to play around with it before we actually install the system. And then on the left here, we have Fedora Media Writer. Now, I think this is unique to Fedora. I don't think I've seen another distro that provides something like this, but it basically makes writing the file to boot media much easier. But usually I just go for the ISO file myself. Then down here, we have a link to other downloads. A lot of other distros have this as well. This is not unique to Fedora, and it's generally to provide alternative files as well as alternative methods to download the files. So we'll take a quick look at it real quick. So at the top, Fedora offers a network installer. What the network installer is basically a bare minimum ISO. The Fedora Workstation ISO that we're downloading right now is about 2 gigabytes, and that's because it's including all the packages that are going to be installed during the distro installation. The network installer is just going to have the bare minimum to start the process. Any packages that need to be installed will be downloaded from the internet as the installer is running. This allows this file to be super small so that you can write it to a CD or maybe a small flash drive. If you're someone who prefers to use torrent downloads for giant files, they offer torrent downloads for some of their bigger ISO files. Many distros do actually. Then Fedora offers alternative architectures. If we go in here, we have ARM64, we have Power architecture, and then we have S390X architecture for Fedora. They also offer cloud-based images as well as testing images. And then down here we have Rawhide, which is basically the developmental version of the next stable release of Fedora. So if you're someone who likes to experiment and beta test and you want to have the latest version of Fedora that's currently in development, then Rawhide would be good for you. But for now, we're just going to download Fedora Workstation 40 and use that to do our dual boot install. Now, if you're pretty familiar with Linux already and you're just more interested on how to do a dual boot install, you're more than welcome to choose another distro completely that has a graphic install. That's the key thing here, is making sure you get a distro with a graphical install. This video may not work very well for those who are trying to install something like Arch Linux or Gentoo, where you're installing from a command line. But any distro like Debian, Ubuntu, OpenSUSE, anything that has a graphical install, those should work fine. Once you have your file, and I have mine right here, we now need to prep it so that we can use it for installing on hardware. Unlike with virtual machines where we can just select the ISO file directly and the hypervisor will take care of the rest, we actually have to take the ISO file and turn it into a bootable media. In order to create bootable media, we either need to have a writable disk, such as a CD or DVD, or we need to have a flash drive. For CD and DVD, first things first, we need to have a CD-DVD writer, not only for the machine that's going to be creating the bootable media, but for the machine that is going to have the dual boot setup, and just in case they're not the same machine. Now, I unfortunately do not have a portable one myself, but I can still show you the initial steps to get started writing to a CD and DVD. So once you have your ISO file and you have your CD DVD writer plugged in, you've got a blank disk put in, you will right click the ISO file and you'll see this option here, burn disk image. This will only show up when you right click an ISO file. So we select that and then we'll get this window, Windows Disk Image Burner. It'll show the disk image file that you're trying to write to a media disk. And then for disk burner, you would pick your device. I don't have one, so it's blank for me. Then once you've selected that, you just go ahead and click burn and it'll write it to the CD and DVD. It's very important that if you're going to write your ISO file to a CD or DVD that you do it this way. You can't just drop the file onto the CD or DVD directly because then it won't be able to be turned into a bootable media. If for whatever reason you don't want to use the Windows Disk Image Burner, there's plenty of software that you can find online. Probably the most common one people use for writing ISOs to a CD and DVD is Image Burn. Now, as for flash drives, which is my preferred bootable media, we will have to download some external software in order to write an ISO to the flash drive. There's a couple of recommended ones out there. My personally preferred software is Balena Etcher. Now, the reason I prefer flash drives over CDs and DVDs is one, it's not completely wasteful. CDs and DVDs, once you write to them, that's it, they're done. You can't really reuse them. But flash drives, once you're done using them as a bootable media, you can wipe it and then continue to use it for something else. On top of that, it's easier to find a one-size-fits-all flash drive for ISOs because there are some ISOs out there that won't even fit on a DVD. There's Ubuntu that has a 6 GB ISO file, and then I believe I've seen some ISOs out there that could be as large as 7 or 8 gigs. So having that one flash drive that can just pretty much cover any size is very useful. So to use Balena Etcher to write an ISO to a flash drive, first thing we need to do is pick our file. So I'm going to choose Flash from File, and there's my ISO right there. Then I'm going to select my target. This will bring up a list of potential targets. My flash drive is really the only one up here. The hidden ones here are my system drives. So be careful with that. Don't accidentally pick one of your system drives. So I'm going to pick my flash drive right here, select, and then you click flash. And depending on how big it is, it can take a while. So just be prepared to wait. And then once it's done, you're going to see some windows up here saying that you need to format your flash drive. Ignore those and close them out because that's just Windows saying that it can't see your flash drive as a usable device. And that's because it was turned into a bootable media. So just ignore those and close them out. But once it's done, you can go ahead and close the window and unplug your flash drive. Okay, once we have our bootable media set up, we now have to prep the machine that's going to be used as a dual boot system. The only thing that we really have to do is modify the partition table. Now, I'll explain what a partition table is in a second and walk you through how to modify it. But first, I have a warning for those who may have a Windows system that's encrypted. The machine I'm using for the sake of this video had BitLocker enabled on it. When I disabled it so I can modify my partition table, the settings apparently disappeared completely. Apparently I had BitLocker enabled, but I didn't actually own it. So when I disabled it, it just disappeared entirely. At least that's my understanding of the situation. I'm not particularly bothered by it because my end goal with this machine is just to have a single Linux operating system installed on it. However, because this is to help you guys learn how to dual boot, that might still be important for you. So if you don't want to risk losing that encryption, then I would say do more research into it to figure out how to disable it and then re-enable it, or just use a completely different system entirely. And the reason this is important is that when you modify your partition table with BitLocker still enabled and you don't disable BitLocker at any point, even after modifying the partition table, the next time you try to boot into Windows, you're going to get a recovery screen. It's basically going to say that it can't access it because something's wrong with the drive. And that's because we modified it while it was encrypted. To fix that, you would have to have your Microsoft account tied to your laptop beforehand and log into your account on another computer to access the recovery key. So before you go into modifying your partition table, make sure you want to disable the encryption. Otherwise, it's going to cause you problems trying to get back into your Windows machine. So with that warning out of the way, let's go ahead and modify the partition table. So to modify the partition table, go to your control panel, And in the search bar, type in partition. We should see this option here, create and format hard disk partitions. And once the tool loads up, it'll show all the hard drives that are on your machine, regardless of what operating system might own them. So if you already have a dual boot set up or something like that, and those partitions belong to something else, it will still show them. It just won't really be able to tell exactly what's on them. For this computer that I'm using, I have a single hard drive that's split into 4 partitions, and all of them belong to Windows. There's our EFI partition, our 2 recovery partitions, and then the actual operating system partition. And for those of you who might have multiple hard drives, I'm not 100% certain because I've never done it with multiple hard drives, but I think setting up for dual booting is roughly the same. I would do some research into it just to make sure, but I'm pretty sure it still operates the same way. But just as a warning, I don't know how that will work, and this tutorial video may not actually be able to apply to you. So what we need to do is we need to go to our OS partition, right click it, and select shrink. And the window that appears, it will have all the sizes in megabytes. So in order to convert into gigabytes, you basically have to take the amount that you want in gigabytes and multiply it by 1024. And to shrink our drive, we basically have to modify this value right here. Now, this is not telling it to shrink to a size, it's telling it to shrink it by a size. So we just have to think about how much space we need for our Linux system and then put that number in. Also a note, it automatically fills in the largest amount that you can actually shrink it by. We cannot put in a number larger than this to shrink it by because there are files on our hard drive that are unmovable. And this is the farthest that we can shrink it before it reaches one of those files. Now I just want to set aside 500 gigabytes for the Linux operating system. Converted into megabytes, that'd be 512,000. So I'm going to type that in, and then I'm going to click shrink. And now I have 500 gigabytes freed up for me to install a Linux operating system. Now we're pretty much set to do the installation process, but we have to do one last thing, and that is figure out what key we have to press to access the boot menu. When you first turn on your machine, you have that boot up screen, and when you get to that boot up screen, you have a chance to press a key to access your BIOS menu. At the same time, we also have an opportunity to access something called the boot menu. The boot menu allows us to select a device to boot from, so if we don't want to boot into our normal operating system, we can select another device. In order to figure out what key you need to press to access your boot menu, you're going to have to go to Google and figure out which key you press based on your system. For manufactured systems from companies like ASUS, Dell, HP, you can usually just look it up by that. If you have a custom system, then you're going to have to look up your motherboard and figure out what it is from there. Once you've figured out what key you need to press, go ahead and plug in your bootable media and then restart your computer. Because this happens during the actual boot up of the device, the graphics card is not active. And so because of that, my capture device cannot show you my screen, but I'll take a picture so you can see what it looks like for me at least. But it should look pretty similar. Basically, it will list all devices that it can detect. It can't really tell whether or not they're bootable, but it'll see what devices that can be bootable are plugged in and will show them on a list. For the hard drive in your computer, it should still be able to tell you what's installed on it. So if you have Windows, it will show you Windows. If you have Linux, it should be able to tell you what Linux system is installed. And if you have a dual boot system already, then it should show you what systems are on that hard drive for the dual boot. But for now, I'm just going to select my flash drive. And when I select my flash drive that has the bootable install media for Fedora, a separate boot menu is going to appear. This boot menu is called the grub menu, and that's what shows up usually at the startup of any Linux system, though in some cases I've seen it not actually show up. But usually it will always show up, especially if you have multiple operating systems to boot from. Again, you can't really see it, but I'll have a picture for you. It's basically showing me that I can start the Fedora Live, I can test the media, or I can do troubleshooting. I'm just going to select Start Fedora Live. And we should eventually see it start to boot up. And we should eventually see this screen appear. This is our live session. So we can take this moment to look around, explore what we have available. It will pretty much show you what you're going to get when you install the system. So these are all the apps you're going to see. And you can even run them and check them out and see what they look like and everything, especially if you've never used them before. The most notable one here is LibreOffice, which you can get on Windows too. It's basically a free alternative to Microsoft Office. And you can run them and check them out and everything. The only thing we can't do right now is save files because we're running off of a bootable media. We don't actually have a hard drive we can save anything to just yet. But let's go ahead and start the install. So we're going to click Install Fedora, and the install program will eventually come up. First, we select our language. So written and spoken, I choose English. My keyboard layout, I choose English United States. Hit continue. Then we get the small installation summary page. Depending on your distro, there could be a lot more options for you to choose from. The Fedora Workstation Everything image typically takes care of a lot of that stuff for you. It has all the defaults just ready to go, so you only have to configure a few things. So we got keyboard set to English US. It's got my time zone set to New York, which is interesting because last time it set me in Europe. So as long as it's set to America, I'll just leave it at New York. And then we have installation destination. Now this is the part we have to pay attention to for the dual boot setup to work. So go ahead and enter it. As you can see, I've got one drive here and it's already selected. That's what that little check mark means. And on it, we see that it says there's 500 gigabytes free. Once you verify that that's selected and that that information is correct, like how much storage you got free, we then go down here. Storage configuration is basically where you set up your partition table for Linux. To keep things simple, I'm going to keep it automatic, but if you know what you're doing and you want to have a more custom partition table, you can choose one of these two options. I'm going to choose automatic, and for dual boot, make sure this option right here is unchecked. Free up space by removing or shrinking existing partitions. We've already shrunk our partition to give us space, and we don't want it to wipe the hard drive completely, otherwise we lose our Windows system. That would defeat the purpose of it being dual boot. So make sure that's unchecked. If you want to encrypt your system, you can check this box here if you want. I'm going to leave it unencrypted. So once we've made sure everything's right, we've got our 500 gigabytes free, we've got it set to automatic, and we've made sure that this box is unchecked, go ahead and click done. Once that's all taken care of, just hit begin installation. And now we just wait for it to finish the installation. Once the install is finished, click finish install. Now we're not technically in our newly installed system just yet. We're still in the live session. So we need to go up here, click on the power button and choose restart. Now make sure to remove your bootable media before your machine fully restarts or you fully start it back up. So I would actually recommend shutting down the machine fully, not just restarting. And this is because some machines might just boot back up into the bootable media. It really depends on the boot order of your machine. But once you do all that and you start it back up, you'll be greeted with another grub menu. But this one will be different from the grub menu that you saw when you were booting up the bootable media. This grub menu will actually show your installed Linux system alongside your installed Windows system. When it starts up for the first time, it's going to immediately start up in the desktop and it's going to have the setup window show up. We have to go through the setup in order to create our user account. So I'll click Start Setup. It's going to ask me if I want to connect to Wi-Fi. I'm not going to do that here, so I'm just going to hit skip. Privacy settings, I'm going to disable everything. Enable third-party repositories. Now for third-party repositories, I would say always enable them because there's always going to be that one software or package that you need for your system that's not actually part of the primary Fedora repo. It could be something like NVIDIA drivers. It could be an external piece of software such as maybe VS Code. So I always say it's a good idea to enable these. And now this is where we create our user. So I'm just going to type in Crozo. It will automatically fill in your username based on what you put in, but you can make changes to it if you'd like. So I can delete the O if I wanted to, or I can just leave it as it is. Then we hit next. We put in our password, and then we're all done. And we're automatically logged into our user after setup, so we don't really have to do anything else. Now real quick, I'm going to restart the system, because now we need to try to boot into our Windows machine to make sure that that's okay. Usually there shouldn't be a problem, but you never know. And it looks like I'm able to get into my Windows partition just fine. So that's how you set up a Windows machine to dual boot between Windows and Linux. So I hope you've enjoyed the video and found it helpful, and if you did, be sure to hit the like button and leave a comment below to let me know what you think. And if you want to see more, head on over to the Wayfair Coding Academy channel to check out my other content. And while you're there, consider subscribing to the channel to stay up to date as new stuff comes out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.